But sadly what happens, and this is one of the tricks of the ego, and we can fall in this very easily, is because we have an argument and then we try to find evidences to support that argument. Instead of trying to see what is the Quran and the Sunnah trying to tell us, but we go with a preconceived idea or a theory or a position, and then we try to find evidence to support that. But Allah is reminding us here that actually what you should be doing is being sincere, have proper research. I mean, in our community, for example, most of the arguments are between groups. One group is trying to prove that their group's position is right, another is trying to prove something else. You know, what would be better is collaborative approach. Okay, what is the solution to this? Let's work together, find a solution to this. Let's put aside group loyalties or personal interests, or trying to maintain your status as gatekeepers of religion, and try to arrive at the truth. Okay, then we're moving on to the next set of verses, which are telling the ordinary people that although you look up to the rabbis, because your view is that they're pious people, they're religious people, and therefore the unlettered Arabs at that time, they looked up to the rabbis. But the next set of verses is asking them to be careful. What are their motives behind all of this? You know, they don't really care about you. They are trying to use you, manipulate you to create chaos and confusion. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَوَدَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ لَوْ يَرُدُّونَكُمْ مِّن بَعْدِ إِيمَانِكُمْ كُفَّارًا حَسَدًا مِّنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِهِمْ مِّن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الْحَقُّ فَاعْفُوا وَاصْفَحُوا حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ تَجِدُوهُ عِندَ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. Okay, the next set of verses are very, very pertinent and relevant to our situation in the world today as Muslims. And when we look at these verses, we'll see why that is. Because although they were revealed 1400 years ago in a particular context, but actually the message today resonates with what's happening to Muslims in Europe, to Muslims in the world today. And it gives us a solution of how to deal with this. And the solution that's provided is different to how we are responding in the current climate. Okay, so many of the people of the scripture wish they could turn you back to disbelief after you have believed, out of envy from themselves, even after the truth has become clear to them. So pardon and overlook until Allah delivers His command. Indeed, Allah is over all things competent. And establish prayer and give zakat, and whatever good you put forward for yourselves, you will find it with Allah. Indeed, Allah of what you do is seeing. Okay, you know, it was really tough at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, especially if you were a Muslim, because you have all these forces, established communities, established people with money, with power, with status, who saw you as a threat and tried to undermine you. And what these verses are telling us is that there will always be people who dislike you, or who have ulterior motives, political, economic ambitions, to undermine you, because what you stand for, what you believe in, doesn't support what they're trying to achieve. And this reflects in their behavior. There'll be bigotry, hatred, jealousy, discrimination. And so the way people deal with you will be on the basis of these ideas. And what was happening at the time of the Prophet ﷺ was the political, the social and the religious landscape was changing. The existing structure had changed. There was a new power structures were being formed. And the rabbis were responding to defend the status quo, because they realized actually our position as religious leaders, as people who decide what goes on in society, is being undermined. Okay? We're going to lose our status. People will no longer look up to us. And we won't be able to pull the strings of society. The businessmen won't come to us to ask for decisions. They will go elsewhere. So they realized the threat to their position. So they began to defend, and all of these discussions that we've had so far were with a view to undermine the Prophet ﷺ. And the way they would do this was they would pretend to be friends of the believers and to be their supporters. And they made alliances with the Quraysh. They made alliances with the Meccan tribes at the time. And they'd spread misinformation, propaganda, and they would demonize the Muslims, that they follow demons, that the Prophet ﷺ is a madman. And they said horrible things about the Prophet ﷺ. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. Same thing. You know. So it was really tough back then. But actually, things haven't changed much. And they never will. Because this is Allah's law. This is Allah's spiritual law. You have to go through this to develop. And there will always be forces in society that are threatened by justice, that are threatened by fairness, by equity, because their vested interests are undermined. So hatred and discrimination today, for example, is reflected in what we call Islamophobia. It's the same thing. There's hatred, all of this. And Islamophobia isn't new. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the people in Mecca, they experienced this all the time. They were boycotted, nobody did business with them, they were thrown from their homes, they were attacked. You know, all these things happened to them. It's nothing new. You know, we just think it's new, but actually, it was nothing new. But the good news is, there's good news, the good news is that this verse provides a solution for us to deal with this. How do we deal with this? And this solution worked back then, and it will work today. And sometimes we have to trust the divine message rather than our own responses. And our responses usually are based on emotion. And we get very emotional very quickly and we just respond and so on. And the key solution here is the phrase fa'fu wasfahu. And fa'fu, to leave alone, to turn away, to overlook, do not take to heart. That's a literal meaning. You don't take things to heart. Or whatever they're doing, do not let your hearts be affected by it. So leave them alone, ignore them, turn away, to overlook. So let's go back to the translation. So many of the people of the scripture wish they could turn you back to disbelief after you believe, out of envy from themselves after the truth. So pardon and overlook. So what was happening to the Muslims was far worse than what was happening to us. And what was Allah saying? Fa'fu wasfahu. Pardon and overlook. Pardon, because God is fully aware and His command will come. You know, we need to do whatever we can, but we have to adopt this mental attitude. You know, we overlook, we don't take offense at every single thing that is said. You know, we don't start protesting at every single thing that happens. You know, fa'fu wasfahu. The Prophet was ridiculed, the Prophet was mocked, the Prophet was attacked. You know, all these things happened. And the advice that God is giving us, fa'fu wasfahu, to leave them alone. Turn away from all the negative things that they are throwing against you, to overlook and do not take to heart. And that's very important. I mean, especially, you know, in this climate, with all Islamophobia happening, some Muslims have taken it to heart really, really seriously. You know, they feel very depressed, they feel very sad, and they feel emotionally disturbed really because there's so much angst. And actually that's not the sign of a believer. The sign of a believer is that God will change the situation. But what we have to do is we have to forgive, we have to overlook, we have to develop our positive qualities and values. And that's the solution. You know, in Makkah, when the Prophet ﷺ was in Makkah, they were attacked all the time. You know, they were ridiculed all the time. People threw rubbish on the Prophet when he was praying. You know, so many things. They boycotted him for 3 years. You know, the children had to eat leaves and so on to survive. You know, all that happened. And yet not a single response or attack from the Muslims against the society. Not a single attack. Okay? It's because for us to be successful, we have to change our inner values, our inner mindsets and attitudes. And that is when the help of Allah comes. Okay, not becoming emotional. Okay. So, what should we do instead? At the moment, we've got two responses. One is a negative and a reactionary response. So we do protests, we boycotts. We get angry and we start attacking. We have public outbursts and even private outbursts. And there's conspiracy theories. Yeah, all of this, around, and it's happening. But what is the divine response to this? What is the divine guidance on this? Positive and divine response is establish prayer and charity. Now this is the fascinating thing. Let's go back to the verses. So here's a context where the Muslims are being attacked. They are being ridiculed. There's a propaganda campaign against them. And the second verse finishes off. So what to do? It doesn't say go and do protests. And it says وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ. Establish the prayer and give the zakat. And there's a huge mystery in that short phrase. أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ means establish your divine link with God. Establish your spirituality. And establish those core values of religion inside you. Okay? Allah doesn't just look at our tongues. He wants to see our hearts and what He values, and He decides the way He deals with us is based upon the quality of our hearts. And that is something that there is little focus on. And we focus more on venting our frustrations than actually developing our spirit. Because the more you develop yourself spiritually, the more strength and confidence you will have. Now, take the example of the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims in Makkah. When they were being attacked, what was the advice? Is Ya ayyuhal muzammil qum al-layla illa qalil, pray more in the night. It's like we can't understand this. I'm being attacked and so on. Rather than God saying go and fight them, become active against them, God is saying no, get your prayer mat out, pray in the night more. Increase your prayer in the night time. Why? Because that will link you with God. You will be able to see the divine plan. You will be able to see the spiritual support. It's an unfortunate thing that one of the qualities that God has is only harm and benefit can come from God alone. And when you're the victim, you can fall into this trap of seeing the perpetrator as causing you harm. And actually that's the only quality. Harm and benefit can only come from God. If you believe that this person or this organization can cause you harm and benefit, you have given a quality, you have taken a partner with God, because that quality belongs to God alone. And so these verses are actually quite mysterious for us. We can't connect with this, because what we know is actually we need to go out and shout and do this. But the Quran is giving us a different response. Okay? Establish prayer. That's the first part. Develop yourself spiritually. The second part, wa'atu zakah, fulfill your obligation to society. Social welfare. Zakat is looking after the needy in our society. These two qualities, if we implement, then you will see the divine blessing and divine favor. And we can see, if we look at just a cursory glance at our societies, let's take the Muslim world, that spiritual connection with God has gone. We've become focused into what the rabbis got, into theological arguments, theological issues. And the second aspect, the welfare of the vulnerable in society. That's the zakat aspect. Those are the two key areas. We build our communities up. We look after the vulnerable people in our society, and we develop ourselves spiritually, then nobody can harm us. The reason why a lot of this happens is because we are not a good advert for Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith, says, Hayrun nas man yanfa'un nas. The best of people is the one who benefits the people the most. And we should ask ourselves this question. What do we contribute to society? We do contribute. There are many positives. We are a very charitable community. The Muslims give more charity than any other community. But look at our charity. People find it difficult to give charity outside our normal existing structures. Up until recently, people, you can't give it to non-Muslims, but yes, you can. Why can't you? And so this idea of looking after the vulnerable in society is key. So the solution to all of this isn't to start picking up your sticks and start fighting. It's the solution is to develop yourself spiritually and develop your own communities. look at the vulnerable people. And the Quran mentions certain vulnerable categories of that time. So it mentions orphans, it mentions widows, it mentions travelers, it mentions captives. But you know, today we have different types of vulnerable people. You know, people who on drugs are vulnerable people. You know, people with mental issues, they are vulnerable people. You know, how many people of those exist in our Muslim communities and we're blind to it? You know, we don't see this, it's not on our radar. It's not discussed in our Islamic circles. Yet look at the Quran, the theme that's coming through. You know what? Amidst all of this, look at your responsibilities for the vulnerable in society. And he finishes off, says, وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا. So no matter what happens, no matter what other people do to you, all the Islamophobia there is, whatever good you do, you will find it. God will keep this for you and reward you for it. So we mustn't forget that it isn't only what's happening in this life. You know, the ultimate prize is the prize in the hereafter. You know, God will keep all the good that you do now. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ. Whatever you present forth for yourselves from good, you will find it with God. Allah will save it for you, He'll put it in His bank account, He'll take care of it, and you will be rewarded handsomely for it. So that's the other dimension we mustn't forget. So 3 key concepts come from here. If you are being attacked, you are vulnerable as a community. What do you need to do? First of all, develop yourself spiritually. Connect yourself with God. You know, believe that harm and benefit can only come from Him. Don't give or attribute power to other organizations or conspiracy theories in society. Second, fulfill your responsibility towards the vulnerable in your society. You look after the vulnerable, that's a zakat. It's a concept, not just the 2.5%. The concept behind is taking care of those who can't take care of themselves in society. And the third is remembering that actually you are, no matter what they do, each good that you do, you're a winner because Allah is storing this for you. You're winning. No matter what harm they do to you, you are still successful. You know, you are successful because what you're presenting to God, God is keeping, and He's going to present that back to you on the Day of Judgment. And it finishes off with Inna Allaha bima ta'maluna basir. You know, indeed, God with whatever you are doing is fully aware, fully seeing of this. So every single thing, every step, you know, we take, every little action we make, everything that we do, Allah is reminding us, don't forget, I am fully aware of every movement that you make. Yeah? Every thought, every word you utter. Inna Allaha bima ta'maluna basir. You know, fully, intimately aware of all of this. And sometimes when you're the victim, you can forget all of this. You can forget that actually there is even a God, that He's watching and He's seeing. And if we believe that God is the just, yeah, doesn't matter. You will be compensated for your loss on the Day of Judgment. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We'll move on to the next set of verses and we'll finish off with this inshallah, and then we'll open up to questions and answers. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فَقَالُوا لَن يَدْخُلَ الْجَنَّةَ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ هُودًا أَوْ نَصَارَى تِلْكَ أَمَانِيُّهُمْ قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ بلى من أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن فله أجره عند ربه ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. And they say, none will enter paradise except one who is a Jew or a Christian. That is merely their wishful thinking. Say, produce your proof if you should be truthful. Yes, on the contrary, whoever submits his faith in Islam to Allah while being a doer of good will have his reward with his Lord. And no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve. So this is the next argument to confuse the people. Okay. You can only enter paradise if you follow our religion. So there's Prophet ﷺ preaching the message of kindness to the weak people, looking after vulnerable people in society, remembering God. And then people want to enter paradise. And this is the next argument now. If you want to enter paradise, you have to become a Jew or a Christian. There's no other way to paradise. And you know, for the ordinary people, you know, psychologically this is a very troubling thing. Now you will not enter paradise unless you become a Jew or a Christian. And this was their last attempt to divert people away from, from the messenger. And then God is saying to them, that is just their wishful thinking. You know, produce your proof. If you are truthful, produce your proof. Now there's a very subtle mystery in this verse. Although this verse is addressing the Jews and the Christians, but actually it's showing you a mentality of religious people. The religious people can become, or sectarian people. They can develop this mentality that nobody can enter paradise unless you join their group. Yeah? There's a wider principle here. Okay, brother, you can't go to paradise unless you join my group, unless our sect, our group. You know, and God is saying, no, you know, where is your proof for this? And we see this amongst our communities as well. There are still people who believe that. And what is fascinating is the answer that Allah gives here. You know, you would have thought, okay, where God would say, okay, don't become a Jew or a Christian, only Muslims will enter paradise. But that's not what it says. Yeah, which is fascinating. It doesn't use the word Muslim here at all. But instead God says, whoever submits his faith in Islam to Allah. And what this means here in the Arabic is Balaman Aslama, whoever surrenders his core being to God. And when you say surrender your core being to God, is you surrender your core being to the core values of justice, fairness, for all the core values of religion. That's surrendering to God. You submit and utterly, you put your own ego to the side, your own self-interest, your own political interest to the side, and you submit to God and His values. And huwa muhsinun, and He does good. And that's it. You are sincerely connected and submitted to God, and you do good, then for Him is His reward with God. No fear, no grief on that person. Okay. And what is really interesting is the word Allah doesn't use the noun Muslim here. Aslama is used as a verb. Whoever submits and surrenders is an act of doing. So this leads us to the $1 million question: who will go to paradise? Right? Who will enter paradise? So this was the argument now. So this debate isn't new. You know, it happened in front of the Prophet ﷺ. The Jews said, no, we're going to go to paradise. The Christians, no, we're going to go to paradise. And the Muslims, no, we're going to go to paradise. So the question is, who will? You know, what are the criteria that these verses show us about who will go to paradise? Okay, there's two approaches. First is the view of the religious people. We're going to join our group, and the Christians, and those are the two groups mentioned in this verse. And this is the view of God. If you have a sincere connection and submission to God, do good and positive actions, okay, then you'll go to paradise. Now the interesting question is, God doesn't mention the Muslims in this verse. But if you look at our mentality, we say the same thing. You know, just because by an accident of birth, somebody is born a Muslim, he's going to go straight to paradise. That is the same argument used by the Jews and Christians. And Allah is rediverting our attention, saying, no, actually, it's not about being born. If you were born in a different faith, you'd have been in a different faith. So you have to choose your submission to God, submission to justice, to fairness, looking after the vulnerable people of society. Do positive actions. You know, ihsan is achieving excellence, achieving good, whatever you do. Okay. And that is what's going to get you to paradise, not the t-shirt you wear or the badge you wear. And that mentality hasn't changed. You still find that rife everywhere. And so it boils down to two things. Either you're an identity Muslim, you're born a Muslim, you wear the t-shirt, you know, you have the outward appearance of a believer, of a Muslim, or you're a character Muslim. And if you notice, I've put the second Muslim with a small m. Yeah? You can be a character Muslim without being a formal Muslim. And you've submitted to the laws of God without being a formal Muslim. But the popular view even today is that it's about belonging to a group. And Allah in these verses completely undermines that thinking. Now, you can't say just because you belong to a group, irrespective of what you do. No, it depends. Ultimately, it depends on God's, because of God's justice and compassion you will enter paradise, not on your actions. but you can't say that I've got a ticket to paradise because I belong to this group. You know, it also depends on what you've done as well, whether you improved your character and you did good as well. Okay, we're gonna stop there.